January 7th, 2026, 4:47 a.m. Eastern Donetsk Oblast. In the first week of January 2026, Russian ground forces committed approximately 1,000 infantry soldiers, 14 armored fighting vehicles, and sustained artillery support to capture a single settlement measuring less than 2.4 square kilometers in the eastern Donetsk region. And the result is visible on the ground as destroyed assault columns, abandoned equipment scattered across frozen fields, and fractured unit cohesion that turned a planned 48-hour operation into a 9-day attrition cycle. Near Velika Novosilka in the southern Donetsk sector, this assault has turned what military planners projected as a straightforward territorial gain into something far more costly, where numerical superiority no longer guarantees breakthrough and massed infantry advances trigger systematic defensive destruction. This village is no longer defined by its pre-war population of 840 residents or its agricultural economy, but by overlapping fields of fire, pre-registered artillery coordinates, and layered observation systems that track movement across every approach vector. The settlement sits in flat terrain broken by scattered tree lines running northeast to southwest. Open fields extend 600 to 800 meters between the last covered positions and the village perimeter. 3 paved roads converge at the center, with secondary dirt tracks connecting to farmsteads now reduced to structural frames and collapsed roofs. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones maintain continuous observation from altitudes between 400 and 1,200 meters, their optical and thermal sensors providing real-time data transmission to artillery coordination centers positioned 8 to 12 kilometers behind the defense line. Russian assault units attempted to exploit early morning darkness and residual ground fog on January 7th. Because these conditions historically degraded optical surveillance and created windows for infantry movement. Yet that tactical logic collapsed as Ukrainian thermal imaging systems began tracking heat signatures through fog layers, identifying individual soldiers at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters in vehicle engine heat at distances approaching 2 kilometers. The presence of constant aerial observation fundamentally changed how time and space functioned across these approach fields. A Russian mechanized column that achieved concealment in a tree line at 0430 hours found itself under precision artillery fire by 0520 hours, with Ukrainian drone operators directing 152mm strikes onto coordinates updated every 90 seconds as vehicles attempted to reposition. What the initial assault plan often fails to explain is the deeper tactical reality behind committing 1,000 soldiers to this specific objective. Russian command projected that overwhelming numerical superiority across a narrow front would saturate Ukrainian defensive positions, forcing withdrawal through sheer pressure of sustained contact. The mathematics appeared straightforward. Ukrainian defenders numbered approximately 180 to 220 soldiers holding prepared positions across the village perimeter, creating a force ratio exceeding 4.5 to 1 in favor of the attacking element. Yet this calculation operated on assumptions that no longer matched battlefield conditions around Velika Novosilka. Because the village had been converted over 3 months into something resembling a fortified strongpoint rather than a population center, with every building either demolished for clear fields of fire or reinforced as a firing position, every basement converted to protected shelter, and every approach covered by interlocking sectors that eliminated dead ground. Ukrainian units had constructed 3 defensive belts extending outward from the village center. The outer belt consisted of observation posts and anti-tank positions, placed 400 to 600 meters beyond the settlement edge, designed not to hold ground, but to provide early warning and inflict initial casualties on approaching forces. The middle belt incorporated the village perimeter itself, with fortified positions built into surviving structures and connecting trenches allowing covered movement between strongpoints. The inner belt functioned as the final defensive line, with prepared positions in the village center and pre-planned withdrawal routes leading to secondary defensive positions 1.2 kilometers to the west. This layered structure meant that Russian forces faced not a single defensive line to breach, but a series of engagement zones, each designed to inflict casualties while Ukrainian units retained the option to fall back to prepared positions, rather than fight to destruction in forward areas. The assault began at 0447 hours on January 7th, with a 40-minute artillery preparation targeting known Ukrainian positions across the village perimeter. Russian guns delivered approximately 600 rounds of mixed caliber onto pre-selected coordinates, attempting to suppress defensive positions and destroy fortifications before infantry advanced into contact. Yet Ukrainian units had anticipated this preparatory bombardment and implemented a tactical withdrawal protocol that pulled personnel into deep shelters and bunkers rated to withstand indirect fire, leaving only minimal observation elements in forward positions to track the barrage and report when it lifted. At 0527 hours, Russian infantry began moving across the open approaches in company-sized elements. Roughly 120 to 150 soldiers advancing in dispersed formation with armored vehicles providing mobile fire support. The expectation was that Ukrainian positions had been degraded by the artillery preparation and that resistance would be disorganized and fragmented. Instead, as Russian units crossed the 400-meter line from the village perimeter, Ukrainian forces initiated a coordinated response that combined multiple systems into a single engagement cycle. Reconnaissance drones transmitted real-time coordinates to artillery units, which delivered precision strikes onto the advancing infantry. Anti-tank guided missiles engaged the supporting armored vehicles from concealed positions at ranges between 1,800 and 2,400 meters. Small arms fire from fortified positions forced infantry to seek cover in terrain that offered minimal protection. Within 18 minutes of crossing the 400-meter threshold, the first Russian assault wave had sustained casualties estimated at 35 to 40%, with 3 BTR-82A armored personnel carriers destroyed and 2 more disabled by mobility kills. The assault stalled as surviving elements attempted to consolidate in whatever cover they could find, primarily shallow depressions and the remnants of destroyed farm buildings that provided concealment but no protection from indirect fire. This reality forced Russian commanders to commit additional waves, despite the failure of the initial assault. Because the operational objective remained the capture of this settlement, and withdrawing after sustaining casualties without achieving territorial gain would represent a tactical defeat that undermined the broader offensive momentum across this sector of the front. At 0610 hours, a second assault wave advanced, this time approaching from a different axis in an attempt to identify weaknesses in the Ukrainian defensive arrangement. These units moved through the northern approaches where terrain offered slightly better cover in the form of a shallow ravine running roughly parallel to the village perimeter. The tactical logic suggested that this covered approach would allow infantry to close the distance to Ukrainian positions before coming under effective fire. Yet Ukrainian defenders had prepared for multi-axis attacks and positioned forces to cover all likely approach routes. As Russian infantry entered the ravine system, they encountered pre-positioned mines that had been emplaced during the 3-month fortification effort. The mines were not laid in dense patterns designed to create impassable obstacles, but in scattered clusters intended to channel movement into specific kill zones where pre-registered artillery could engage with maximum effect. The northern assault wave suffered a similar fate to the first attack. Mines inflicted initial casualties, forcing units to slow their advance and attempt to identify safe routes through the contaminated ground. This delay allowed Ukrainian observers to direct artillery onto the ravine, delivering air-bursting munitions that proved devastatingly effective against infantry caught in the confined terrain. Casualties mounted rapidly, and by 0645 hours, the second wave had also stalled short of the Ukrainian defensive perimeter. Russian forces had now committed approximately 400 soldiers and lost 6 armored vehicles while gaining 0 territorial control. The tactical situation had devolved into a stalemate where attacking forces could not achieve breakthrough, but command pressure demanded continued attempts to capture the objective. Throughout the morning of January 7th and into the afternoon, Russian units launched 4 more separate assault attempts, each following similar patterns. Artillery preparation would target Ukrainian positions, infantry would advance under covering fire from surviving vehicles and supporting weapons, and Ukrainian defenders would respond with coordinated fires that combined drones, artillery, anti-tank systems, and small arms into overlapping engagement zones that systematically degraded each assault before it could penetrate the defensive perimeter. By 1730 hours on January 7th, Russian forces had sustained estimated casualties approaching 280 soldiers killed or wounded, with 9 armored vehicles destroyed and 3 more abandoned due to mechanical failure or crew casualties. Ukrainian defenders had suffered approximately 15 to 20 casualties from sustained artillery bombardment and infantry firefights. but the force ratio had shifted dramatically from the initial 4.5 to 1 advantage to approximately 3 to 1, as Russian combat power degraded through attrition. What stands out around Velika Novosilka is how the tactical dynamics prevented Russian forces from leveraging their numerical superiority. The combination of Ukrainian observation systems, pre-registered fires, and prepared defensive positions meant that Russian units could not achieve concentration without being detected and engaged during the approach phase. Every attempt to mass forces for a decisive push created dense target arrays that Ukrainian artillery could strike with devastating effect. Every attempt to advance in dispersed formations reduced the combat power available at the point of contact to levels that Ukrainian defenders could defeat through direct fire alone. This tactical paradox trapped Russian commanders in an impossible situation. They could not succeed with dispersed forces too weak to overwhelm defensive positions. They could not succeed with concentrated forces that presented lucrative targets during the approach. The only remaining option was sustained attrition, attempting to wear down Ukrainian defenders through repeated assaults that accepted heavy casualties in exchange for gradual degradation of defensive capabilities. Over the following 8 days, this pattern continued. Russian forces would rotate fresh units into the assault, attempting to maintain pressure despite accumulating losses. Ukrainian defenders would fall back incrementally, abandoning the outer defensive belt on January 9th and contracting to the middle belt while inflicting maximum casualties on advancing forces. By January 12th, Russian units had finally entered the village perimeter, only to discover that Ukrainian forces had prepared the urban terrain as a series of interconnected strongpoints that turned every building into a separate engagement. FPV drones emerged as a critical factor in the later stages of the assault. As Russian infantry attempted to consolidate positions within the village, Ukrainian operators began flying FPV attack drones into buildings, trenches, and any location where attacking forces had established temporary positions. These drones operated at altitudes below 50 meters, flying directly toward heat signatures and detonating on impact with lethal effect. The presence of FPV systems meant that Russian soldiers could not safely occupy any position that had been observed by Ukrainian reconnaissance. A squad taking shelter in a partially collapsed building would find itself under FPV attack within 20 to 40 minutes of being detected. This created a tactical environment where holding captured ground became as dangerous as the assault itself. By January 15th, Russian forces had committed portions of 3 separate motorized rifle battalions to this single village, sustaining cumulative casualties estimated at 620 to 680 soldiers killed or wounded, with 14 armored vehicles destroyed, and numerous other vehicles damaged or abandoned. Ukrainian forces had withdrawn from the village center to prepared positions on the western edge, having inflicted a casualty exchange ratio approaching 3.5 to 1 while preserving the majority of their combat power. The village itself had ceased to exist as a functional location. Every structure had been damaged or destroyed through 9 days of sustained combat. Russian forces now occupied ruins rather than a defensible position, having paid an extraordinarily high cost for terrain that provided minimal tactical advantage. What this assault demonstrates is the brutal mathematics of modern defensive operations when properly prepared and resourced. Ukrainian defenders transformed a small village into a comprehensive engagement zone where every advantage of terrain, observation, and prepared fires could be leveraged against numerically superior attackers. The traditional doctrinal answer of 3 to 1 advantage for successful assault operations appears increasingly inadequate when defenders possess observation and strike capabilities that integrate drones, precision artillery, and layered fortifications.